The B-17 Flying Fortress was dying. It flew low over northern Germany, trailing smoke from two shattered engines. The aluminum skin was torn open in 100 places. Flak holes punched through the fuselage like a child's paper craft, riddled with pencil wounds. The plexiglass nose was fractured, spiderwebbed with cracks that caught the pale December sunlight. Wind howled through the gaps, freezing the blood on the floor where it pooled. Inside, half the crew was wounded. The tail gunner lay motionless in his station, unconscious, slumped against twisted metal. The ball turret gunner had crawled up into the fuselage, shaking, clutching a wound in his leg. The radio operator pressed gauze against the side of a dying waist gunner's chest, his hands red and trembling. The pilot, Second Lieutenant Charlie Brown, gripped the yoke with hands that no longer had feeling. His face was pale. His oxygen mask hung loose around his neck. The lines had been cut by shrapnel somewhere over Bremen. He was flying on instinct now, half-conscious, hypoxic, willing the bomber to stay level for just one more minute. Then another. Behind him, the co-pilot was slumped forward, dazed, blood running from a gash across his forehead. The bomber should not have been flying. It should have fallen from the sky 10 minutes ago. But it hadn't. Somehow, impossibly, ye old pub kept flying. The four Wright Cyclone engines, or what remained of them, coughed and sputtered. Number 3 was gone entirely, its propeller frozen in place, bent backward like a broken bone. Number 4 trailed, a thin ribbon of black smoke. The two on the left wing were barely holding together, their rhythms uneven, choking on damaged fuel lines and shredded coolant systems. Below, the flat farmland of northern Germany stretched endlessly toward the horizon. Snow dusted the fields. Rivers gleamed like silver threads in the weak winter light. The North Sea lay somewhere ahead, 30 miles, well, maybe 40. If they could reach it, they had a chance. If they could cross it, they might see England again. If. The date was December 20th, 1943. This is not fiction. This happened. The mission had begun that morning with ice on the runways at Kimbolton, England. The briefing room had been cold, the air thick with cigarette smoke and nervous energy. 32 B-17s from the 379th Bomb Group were tasked with hitting the Focke-Wulf aircraft factories in Bremen, one of the most heavily defended targets in the Reich. Charlie Brown had listened to the intelligence officer describe the flak concentrations, the fighter bases, the expected opposition. He was 21 years old. This was his first mission as an aircraft commander. His crew was green, most of them barely out of training, teenagers who had never seen combat. The bombardier, a kid from Ohio, had asked how bad the flak would be. The intelligence officer had paused, then said, "Heavy." That was all. At 0800 hours, the engines roared to life. The smell of aviation fuel and exhaust filled the morning air. One by one, the bombers taxied into position, their tails painted with the triangle A, marking of the 379th. Ye Old Pub was among them. A war-weary B-17F, that had seen dozens of missions, her aluminum skin patched and repaired, her nose art-faded but still visible. They climbed into formation over the English Channel, joining hundreds of other bombers from other groups, forming a stream of metal and men that stretched across the winter sky. Fighter escorts, P-47 Thunderbolts, weaved above them, their stubby wings catching the sunlight. Charlie Brown flew in the high squadron, tucked into the defensive box formation. He could see the other bombers around him, close enough to count the rivets on their wings. The intercom crackled with chatter, navigators calling out checkpoints, gunners testing their weapons, waist gunners joking to calm their nerves. They crossed into German airspace at 10:30 hours. The flak began almost immediately. Black puffs of smoke erupted around them, each one a burst of shrapnel moving at thousands of feet per second. The bomber shook with each nearby explosion. The smell of cordite seeped into the cockpit. Charlie tightened his grip on the yoke, holding formation, trusting that staying close to the others was their best defense. Then the fighters came. Messerschmitt BF 109s and Focke-Wulf FW 190s tore into the formation from 12 o'clock high, diving through the bombers with cannons blazing. Tracer rounds arced through the sky like angry hornets. The radio exploded with voices. Fighter, 2 o'clock. 3 going down on the left. Watch the tail. Watch the tail. A B-17 2 positions ahead took a direct hit. Its wing folded upward, and the bomber spun out of formation, trailing fire. Charlie saw 3 parachutes open. Only 3. The U-427s engaged, turning and burning after the German fighters. But there were too many. The Luftwaffe pilots were aggressive, experienced, and they knew exactly where to hit a bomber to bring it down. They came in pairs, one from the nose, one from the tail, saturating the formation with fire. Ye Old Pub shuddered as cannon rounds punched through the right wing. The top turret gunner returned fire, his twin .50 caliber guns hammering in short, controlled bursts. Spent casings rained down into the cockpit, clinking against the metal floor. The formation pressed on. Bremen came into view at 11:45 hours, a sprawl of industrial buildings and factories nestled along the Weser River. The flak intensified. The sky turned black with bursts. Each explosion sent shrapnel tearing through the air, shredding metal, killing men in an instant. The bomb bay doors opened. The bombardier took control, his eyes locked on the Norden bomb site, making tiny adjustments, waiting for the crosshairs to align. The bomber had to fly straight and level now. No evasive action, no deviation. They were a sitting target. Bombs away. The B-17 lurched upward as 4,000 pounds of high explosives dropped toward the factories below. The bomb bay doors closed. The formation banked left, beginning the long turn toward home. That's when everything went wrong. A flak shell detonated directly beneath Ye Old Pub. The blast lifted the bomber like a toy, slamming it upward and sideways. Shrapnel ripped through the fuselage, shredding hydraulic lines, severing control cables, puncturing fuel tanks. The plexiglass nose shattered. The bombardier screamed as fragments tore into his shoulder. The navigator's table exploded into splinters. The IGEN system failed. Charlie Brown felt the first wave of hypoxia hit him, a creeping numbness, a feeling of disconnection, as if he were watching himself from a distance. His vision narrowed. His thoughts slowed. Number 3 engine erupted in flames. The co-pilot reached for the fire extinguisher toggle, but his hands were shaking, his movements sluggish. Another flak burst rocked the bomber. The windscreen cracked. Blood splattered across the instrument panel. "Feather 3!" Charlie shouted, his voice muffled, distant. The engine's propeller blades twisted into the wind, reducing drag, but the fire continued to burn. Then mercifully, it went out, starved of fuel. But the bomber was falling. The nose dropped. The horizon tilted. The airspeed indicator climbed, 200 miles per hour, 220, 240. The controls felt loose, unresponsive. Charlie pulled back on the yoke, but the elevator cables were damaged. The response sluggish. They were in a dive. The altimeter unwound rapidly. 15,000 feet. 12,000. 10,000. The formation above them continued west, unaware that ye old pub was gone. Charlie's vision tunneled. The edges of the world turned gray. He could hear voices on the intercom, but they sounded far away, underwater. Someone was calling for the crew to bail out. Someone else was screaming. He pulled harder. At 7,000 feet, the nose began to rise. At 5,000 feet, the bomber leveled out. Charlie gasped, sucking in the thin, freezing air. His head cleared slightly. He looked out the window and saw that they were alone. No formation, no escorts, just a single, crippled bomber limping over enemy territory. He keyed the intercom. Damage report. The voices that came back were shaken, confused. The tail gunner wasn't responding. The ball turret gunner reported he was wounded, but could still move. The waist gunner was hit badly, bleeding from the chest, struggling to breathe. The top turret guns were jammed. The radio was dead. They had no communication with the outside world. They had no fighter cover. They were 70 miles inside Germany, flying at 5,000 feet, barely holding together. Charlie pointed the nose west and pushed the throttles forward on the remaining engines. The bomber groaned, metal scraping against metal, but it kept flying. Below, the German countryside passed slowly, forests, villages, roads. If they went down here, they would spend the rest of the war in a POW camp. Or worse. The minutes crawled by. Then from the tail, a weak voice. "Fighter, 6 o'clock. Oberleutnant Franz Stigler was already in the air when the call came through. He had taken off from Jever Airfield minutes earlier, climbing hard in his Messerschmitt Bf 109 G6, responding to reports of American bombers returning from Bremen. The fighter was fast, agile, armed with two 13mm machine guns and a single 20mm cannon in the nose. Stigler had flown it for months, knew every sound it made, every vibration, every quirk. He was an ace. 27 kills. One more would earn him the Knight's Cross, the highest honor a fighter pilot could receive. He scanned the sky, eyes sharp, looking for contrails, for glints of metal, for anything out of place. Then he saw it. A lone B-17, flying low and slow, trailing smoke. Stigler banked toward it, throttle wide open. The Messerschmitt closed the distance quickly. 1,000 meters, 500, 300. He moved into position, behind the bomber, lining up his shot, finger resting on the trigger. The tail guns didn't move. Stigler frowned. He moved closer, pulling alongside the bomber's port side. And that's when he saw the damage. The B-17 was destroyed. The entire tail section was shredded, the fabric skin torn away, exposing the internal structure like bones through flesh. The vertical stabilizer had holes the size of dinner plates. The right horizontal stabilizer was barely attached. The fuselage was pockmarked with hundreds of flak holes, some small, some large enough to see through. Number 3 engine was feathered, its cowling blackened from fire. Number 4 was smoking. The ball turret hung lifeless beneath the fuselage, its guns pointing down, motionless. The top turret was silent. Stigler moved closer still, until he could see into the waist section through a massive tear in the fuselage. What he saw made him hesitate. Men were moving inside, not fighting, but struggling to help each other. One crewman was on his knees, holding another man down, trying to stop the bleeding. Another sat against the bulkhead, his face pale, his eyes closed. There was blood on the floor. So much blood. Stigler looked forward, toward the cockpit. Through the cracked windscreen, he could see the pilot, young, maybe 20, maybe younger, hunched over the controls, barely conscious. The American bomber wasn't a threat. It was a wreck, a dying machine full of dying men. Stigler's hand eased off the trigger. He thought of something his commanding officer, Gustav Rodel, had told him years ago, back when Stigler was a rookie in North Africa. You are fighter pilots first and last, and always. If I ever hear of any of you shooting at a man in a parachute, I will shoot you myself. Rodel had believed that honor still mattered, even in war, that there were lines you didn't cross, even when your country demanded it. Stigler stared at the crippled bomber. This wasn't a man in a parachute, but it was close enough. He thought about his brother, August, a Luftwaffe pilot killed over France. He thought about his own close calls, the times he had barely made it back, the times other pilots could have finished him, but didn't. He thought about what would happen if he shot this bomber down. 10 men would die. 10 men who were already dying. And for what? One more kill? A medal? Stigler exhaled slowly. He eased his fighter closer, moving up alongside the bomber's left wing, until he was flying in formation with it, a Messerschmitt and a B-17, side by side over German soil. Charlie Brown saw the fighter, and his heart stopped. It was close, impossibly close, its camouflaged wings and fuselage almost within touching distance. The black crosses on the wings were clearly visible. The canopy was open slightly, and Charlie could see the pilot's face. He was looking right at him. For a moment, neither man moved. Charlie's hand went instinctively toward the control column, but there was nothing he could do. The bomber had no speed, no altitude, no defenses. If the German wanted to kill them, they were already dead. But the Messerschmitt didn't fire. It just flew alongside them, matching their speed, holding position. Charlie blinked, confused, struggling to make sense of what he was seeing. Was the fighter shepherding them toward a flak battery, forcing them to land? Then the German pilot raised his hand. He pointed west, toward the coast. Charlie stared. The German pilot pointed again, more insistently this time, then motioned with his hand. A clear signal. Turn. Head for the sea. Charlie understood. He was being told to run. Slowly, carefully, Charlie adjusted the bomber's heading, pointing the nose northwest toward the distant, North Sea. The Messerschmitt stayed with him, flying off the left wing, close enough that Charlie could see the pilot's eyes through the canopy. They flew like that for several minutes, predator and prey, moving together through the cold December sky. Then, ahead, a flak battery opened fire. The gunners on the ground saw the B-17 and began tracking it, their guns swiveling, preparing to fire. The first shell burst 100 yards to the right. The sound was closer. Stigler broke formation, banking sharply toward the flak position. He rocked his wings, a signal, a warning. Don't shoot. This one is mine. The flak gunners hesitated, confused. Why was a Luftwaffe fighter protecting an American bomber? But the guns fell silent. Stigler returned to his position on the B-17's wing. They continued west. The crew of Ye Old Pub watched in stunned silence. The radio operator, who had crawled forward to see, couldn't believe what he was seeing. The top turret gunner stared through his shattered canopy, his hands still on the useless guns. Charlie Brown kept flying. His hands were numb. His vision swam. But he kept the wings level, kept the nose pointed toward England, kept the engines running. The coastline appeared on the horizon, a thin gray line where land met sea. Stigler stayed with them until they crossed it. Then, as the North Sea stretched out beneath them, the Messerschmitt pulled ahead, moved in front of the bomber's nose, and rocked its wings one final time. A salute. Stigler looked at Charlie Brown through the plexiglass, and for a brief moment, their eyes met again. Then the German fighter peeled away, banking hard to the right, and disappeared back toward the continent. Ye Old Pub flew on alone. The bomber barely made it back to England. Charlie Brown coaxed it across the North Sea, willing the engines to keep turning, praying the fuel would last, fighting to stay conscious. The coastline of England appeared like a miracle. Green fields, stone villages, the unmistakable outline of RAF seething. The landing gear wouldn't to deploy fully. The hydraulics were gone. Charlie brought the bomber in on 2 wheels and a prayer, touching down hard on the grass strip, the bomber skidding and shuddering before finally grinding to a halt. The crew stumbled out onto the wing, dazed, bleeding, alive. Ground crews rushed toward them, medics close behind. They stared at the B-17 in disbelief. The entire tail section was barely attached. The fuselage looked like it had been through a shredder. One mechanic counted over 200 holes. "How the hell are you still flying?" someone asked. Charlie Brown didn't have an answer. Later, in the debriefing room, he told the intelligence officer what had happened. About the German fighter, about the escort, about the salute. The officer listened, stone-faced. Then he said, "Don't tell anyone about this. Don't put it in your report. If word gets out that a Luftwaffe pilot spared you, people won't understand. They'll think you made a deal. They'll think you're lying." Charlie Brown nodded slowly. He never spoke of it again, not during the war, not for decades afterward. Franz Stigler landed at Javer Airfield and taxied to his revetment. He climbed out of the cockpit, legs shaking, and stood on the wing of his fighter, staring at the sky. He told no one what he had done. If his superiors found out he had spared an enemy bomber, he could be court-martialed, or worse. By late 1943, the Luftwaffe was desperate. Pilots who showed mercy were seen as traitors. Stigler knew he had taken a risk, but he also knew he had made the right choice. "I could not have shot at them," he thought. "It would have been like shooting at a parachute." He walked to the operations room, filed his patrol report, and said nothing about the B-17. The Knight's Cross would have to wait. The war continued. Charlie Brown flew more missions, survived more flak, saw more friends die. He completed his tour and returned to the United States, carrying the memory of that December morning locked inside him. Franz Stigler continued flying, was shot down twice, survived the war, and emigrated to Canada in the 1950s, starting a new life far from the ruins of Germany. For 46 years, neither man spoke of what happened. They didn't know each other's names. They didn't know if the other had survived the war. They had shared 5 minutes in the sky, and then the world had moved on. But neither of them forgot. In 1990, Charlie Brown, now retired and living in Florida, decided to search for the German pilot who had saved his life. He placed a notice in a newsletter for former Luftwaffe pilots, describing the encounter, the date, the location, the damaged B-17. He didn't know if anyone would respond. He didn't know if the pilot was even still alive. Then one day, a letter arrived from Canada. It was from Franz Stigler. "I was the one," the letter said. "I was the pilot in the Messerschmitt." They spoke on the phone for hours, two old men separated by thousands of miles and nearly 50 years, piecing together the details of that December morning. Every detail matched. The damage to the bomber, the flak battery, the salute. They arranged to meet. When they saw each other for the first time, standing in an airport terminal, they embraced. Not as enemies, as brothers. "I didn't have any ammunition left," Charlie said, tears in his eyes. "We couldn't have fought back even if we wanted to." "I know," Franz said quietly. "I saw." They spent the rest of their lives as close friends, attending air shows together, giving speeches about their encounter, telling the story to anyone who would listen. They became a symbol of something rare and fragile, proof that even in the midst of total war, humanity could still break through. Franz Stigler passed away in 2008 at the age of 92. Charlie Brown followed in 2008, just months later at the age of 87. Their story endured. On December 20th, 1943, two men met in the sky over Germany. One was American, one was German. One flew a dying bomber, one flew a Predator built to kill. The rules of war said they were supposed to destroy each other, but instead they chose mercy. Franz Stigler could have become an ace that day. He could have earned his Knight's Cross, his name etched into the history books alongside the Luftwaffe's greatest pilots. He could have been celebrated, promoted, honored. Instead, he chose to let 10 men live. He chose honor over glory. He chose humanity over hatred. Charlie Brown could have died that day, just another casualty in a war that claimed millions. His name could have been carved into a memorial stone in England. Another young pilot who never came home. Another telegram delivered to grieving parents. Another empty chair at a dinner table. Instead, he survived to tell a story that defied everything the world thought it knew about war. For 5 minutes, above the frozen fields of northern Germany, the war stopped. Two enemies refused to kill. And in doing so, they proved something the world desperately needed to remember, something that gets lost in the statistics and the strategy and the grand narratives of history. They proved that even in the darkest skies, compassion could still fly. That even when surrounded by death, honor could still matter. That even in a world consumed by hatred, two men could still choose to see each other as human. There were no witnesses to that moment except the crews of both aircraft. No cameras captured it, no medals were awarded for it. For nearly 50 years, it remained hidden, a secret both men carried alone. But it happened in the cold sky over Germany, while millions fought and died, while cities burned and nations bled. Two men chose mercy over murder. They chose life over orders. They chose to remain human in a world that demanded they become monsters. I didn't think of him as the enemy, Franz Stigler said years later, sitting in his home in Canada, an old man with kind eyes and steady hands. I thought of him as a man trying to get home, just like I would want to get home, just like my brother tried to get home and didn't make it. I saw those boys in that bomber, bleeding, dying trying to save each other. How could I shoot them? They were already beaten. The war was already over for them. What would killing them prove? That I was a good Nazi? That I followed orders? Number. I was on a fighter pilot. I was not a murderer. Charlie Brown never forgot that December morning, the moment a German fighter appeared beside his dying bomber, not to destroy it, but to save it. He never forgot the eyes he saw through that canopy, the hand raised in salute, the impossible choice one man made in the middle of a war that allowed no choices. He could have killed us all, Charlie said decades later, his voice still filled with wonder. We were defenseless, helpless. One burst from his guns and we'd have gone down. But he didn't. He flew with us. He protected us. He got us home. I don't know why. I'll never fully understand why, but I thank God every day that He did. They carried that memory for the rest of their lives. A memory that weighed nothing and everything, that cost nothing and meant everything. And when they finally met again, nearly half a century later, standing in that hotel lobby in Seattle, they realized something profound. That the 5 minutes they shared in the sky had defined them more than any battle, more than any medal, more than any victory or defeat. That mercy, even in war, was never wasted. That the choice to spare a life mattered more than the choice to take one. That in the end, what made them human wasn't how well they killed, but how well they chose not to. The story of Charlie Brown and Franz Stigler became a legend in military aviation circles. Books were written about it. Documentaries were made. The two men were interviewed together, their friendship a living testament to what they had experienced. At air shows, they would stand together in front of a restored B-17, and Franz would point to the tail section and say, "This is where I first saw him. I came up from behind, expecting to see guns shooting at me, but there was nothing. Just silence. Just damage." And Charlie would point to the sky and say, "He came out of nowhere. I thought we were dead. But instead of shooting, he saved us. He gave us a gift. He gave us our lives back." Young pilots would ask Franz why he did it, why he disobeyed orders, why he risked everything. And he would always give the same answer. Because it was the right thing to do. Because in that moment, the war didn't matter. The uniforms didn't matter. The flags and the politics and the hatred, none of it mattered. What mattered was that there were 10 young men in that airplane who wanted to live. And I had the power to let them live. So I did. It was that simple. It was that complicated. They would ask Charlie what it felt like being saved by the enemy. He would pause, choosing his words carefully. "It felt like proof," he would say. "Proof that we're all human, that underneath the uniforms and the propaganda and the orders, we're all just trying to survive, trying to do what's right, trying to get home." Franz gave me hope. Not just hope that I would survive that day, but hope that humanity itself could survive. That we weren't all monsters. That mercy still existed, even in the worst places, even in the worst times. The B-17 Ye Old Pub never flew again after that December day. The damage was too severe. The airframe was written off, stripped for parts, its fuselage melted down for scrap. But its story lived on. Franz Stigler's Messerschmitt survived the war, was captured by the British, and eventually ended up in a museum in England. Its yellow nose cone faded, its camouflage paint worn, but still intact. 2 aircraft, 1 American, 1 German, both built to kill, both flown by men who chose differently. The war ended in 1945. Germany surrendered. The bombers stopped flying. The fighters were grounded. Millions of men came home. millions more didn't. But the story of that December morning lived on in the hearts of two men who refused to let it be forgotten. And when they died, within months of each other, in 2008, they left behind something more valuable than any military record, or medal, or citation. They left behind proof. Proof that even in hell, angels can still fly. Proof that even in darkness, light can still break through. Proof that even when the world demands you become a killer, you can still choose to remain human. Today, the story of Charlie Brown and Franz Stigler is taught in military academies around the world. It's a story about rules of engagement, about the laws of war, about the difference between following orders and following conscience. But more than that, it's a story about two men who met in the worst possible circumstances and chose the best possible response. They chose to see each other, not as targets, not as statistics, not as enemies, but as human beings. And that choice, made in 5 minutes above a frozen landscape, made by a German pilot with his finger on the trigger and an American pilot with no way to fight back, that choice echoed across decades, across continents, across generations. It echoes still. In a sky ruled by death, two men proved that mercy still had a place. In a world consumed by war, two enemies proved that humanity could still prevail. In 5 minutes that should have ended in death, life was chosen instead, and that made all the difference. The B-17 and the Messerschmitt flew together for only 5 minutes. But those 5 minutes lasted a lifetime. Charlie Brown and Franz Stigler never forgot that December morning, never forgot the moment when war stopped and humanity began, when the machinery of death paused and the spirit of life took over, when two enemies looked at each other and chose mercy over murder. They never forgot. And neither should we, because their story isn't just about World War II. It isn't just about bombers and fighters and the European theater. It's about something older and deeper and more important than any war. It's about the choice we all face in our own ways, in our own moments. The choice to hate or to understand. The choice to destroy or to preserve. The choice to see others as enemies or as fellow human beings. Franz Stigler and Charlie Brown made their choice on December 20th, 1943, in the cold sky over Germany. They chose life. They chose mercy. They chose to remain human when the world was trying to make them into something less. And because of that choice, 10 men survived who should have died. And because of that choice, 2 enemies became brothers. And because of that choice, we have this story, this reminder that even in the darkest times, compassion can still fly, honor can still matter, and humanity can still prevail. Dedicated to 2nd Lieutenant Charlie Brown, 379th Bomb Group, United States Army Air Forces, and Oberleutnant Franz Stigler, Jagdgeschwader 27, Luftwaffe, 2 warriors who proved that mercy is not weakness, that honor transcends nationality, and that in the end, we are all just trying to get home. December 20th, 1943. Over Germany. when two enemies refused to kill. That day, he could have earned his Knight's Cross, his name etched into history as one of the Luftwaffe's great pilots. Instead, he chose to let 10 men live. Charlie Brown could have died that day, just another casualty, in a war that claimed millions. His name could have been carved into a memorial stone in England, one more young pilot who never came home. Instead, he survived to tell a story that defied everything the world thought it knew about war. For 5 minutes, above the frozen fields of northern Germany, the war stopped. Two enemies refused to kill. And in doing so, they proved something the world desperately needed to remember: that even in the darkest skies, compassion could still fly. Even when surrounded by death, honor could still matter. Even in a world consumed by hatred, two men could still choose to see each other as human. "I didn't think of him as the enemy," Franz Stigler said years later. "I thought of him as a man trying to get home." Charlie Brown never forgot that December morning. The moment a German fighter appeared beside his dying bomber, not to destroy it, but to save it. Franz Stigler never forgot the faces he saw through the torn fuselage, young men bleeding, trying to save each other. They carried that memory for the rest of their lives. And when they finally met again, nearly half a century later, they realized something profound: that the 5 minutes they shared in the sky had defined them more than any medal ever could. That mercy, even in war, was never wasted. That the choice to spare a life mattered more than the choice to take one. The B-17 and the Messerschmitt flew together for only 5 minutes. But those 5 minutes echoed across a lifetime, and they echo still. In a sky ruled by death, two men proved that mercy still had a place.